Yeah, so I think I can start now.
Yeah.
So I hope I'm audible to all of you. So I would like to thank each and every one of you, particularly Srinivas sir and Srikant sir, for giving me this opportunity to present my humble work, which I'm carrying on optical switches and modulators. So I'm currently affiliated to the Department of Avionics at Indian Institute of Space Science and Technology, situated at Trivandrum, which is a research institute which belongs to the Department of Space. I'm here today to talk about some of my work which I have been doing on resonant cavity based optical modulators and switches that uses electro-absorption effect. So for the next probably 30 or 40 minutes, you are going to hear something about optical switches and modulators. You might all be aware about optical switches and modulators, but we'll just have some. I'll just try to give you some brief introduction about what is the need of an optical switch or a modulator, and what are the various configurations that are available, and what are the drawbacks of the existing optical switches or modulators, and what are the advantages of resonant cavity based optical switches and modulators. And also I'll try to introduce some of the recent works that have happened on resonant cavity based optical switches and modulators, and then if possible we'll try to have a brief discussion, or we'll just conclude it. Okay, so just inviting your attention towards the basic block diagrams or the basic building blocks of an optical communication system. So an optical communication system basically involves an optical transmitter, and then you have a communication channel which is used for carrying the information signal from one place to another, and at the other side, at the receiver side, you have an optical receiver. So the optical transmitter is basically a laser diode. It's basically a light source. And what kind of light source? It should be a coherent light source. Normally it should be a coherent light source, but so generally we can use an LED which is not really coherent, or you can use a really coherent light source which you call it as a laser diode. So it's either a laser diode or an LED. So these both are light sources which are designed to specifically emit at a particular wavelength. So this information signal, or the light signal, what you want to send, is being sent to a communication channel, and this communication channel could be usually an optical fiber or could be an optical waveguide. And then at the receiver side, you have a photodetector whose job is to receive the photons, absorb the photons, convert those photons into electrons and holes, and as a result, when the photon is absorbed, it creates a photocurrent. And depending upon the magnitude of the photocurrent, the receiver is going to decide either whether it has received a 1 or a 0. All right, so this is a basic block diagram of an optical communication system. Now, in the case of an optical communication system, normally we try to employ the digital transmission where the information signals are usually sent in the forms of ones and zeros. And if you are going to have an analog communication system, you are going to continuously vary the amplitude of the signal. Now, light, as you know, is an electromagnetic signal, and any electromagnetic signal can be represented by an amplitude component, a phase component, and a frequency component. So, A can be the electromagnetic signal can be represented by, let's say, A naught sine of omega t plus phi, where A naught is the amplitude, phi is the phase, omega is the angular frequency. So you can vary any one of these components, and accordingly you can modulate the property of light. So just similar to what we have in the normal electrical communication system or an electronic communication system, you can have an amplitude modulation system, you can have a phase modulation system, or you can have a frequency modulation system. However, in the context of optical communication system, what we generally change is the amplitude of the signal. And when I talk, so by amplitude, what I mean is, so if I want to send a 1, I would send a light pulse. And if I want to send a 0, there is no light pulse. So the presence of photon indicates 1, and the absence of photons indicates 0. That's the most easiest way of sending information signal in the context of optical communication system. So modulation is the property by which you change some parameter of light. And in the case of an LED or a laser diode, you can simply change the drive current. The drive current means the current what you are supplying to the device, and thereby you can change the light output power. So that phenomena is being described by this figure. So in the case of LED or a laser diode, you change the drive current, and thereby you can change the light output power. So that means you can modulate, you can change the output power. So the output power can be modulated or can be varied by changing the input current. So this is what is essentially called as modulation. And since we are talking about photons, or since we are talking about the optical domain, you call it as optical modulation. Now, optical switching is something slightly different. So imagine that you have an optical network, or let's say that you have this B here, you have a node, you have a junction here, where you have multiple signals that are arriving at this point B. Now, once these signals arrive at B, you want to route some of the signals to C, or you want to route some of the signals to D. So this process is what is called a switching, where you are changing the destination, or you are changing the spatial location of an individual optical signal in accordance to a control signal. So you have a control signal, and depending upon that control signal, you can make the light, or you can make the photons to flow from B to C or from B to D. And this control signal could be either purely electronic, could be a hybrid of optical and electronic, or could be an all optical signal. So the switch what I am going to talk about is basically a hybrid switch, where the control is actually electronic, but an electronic signal is actually used to control the flow of an optical signal. However, in future, what we are planning to aim is an all optical switch, where you can use photons to control photons. So we are not going to talk about this, but we are going to, in my talk, so in our today's discussion, we are going to talk about this hybrid devices, where you use an electrical signal to control light. Okay, so this is what you mean by optical switching or optical modulation. Now, there are various modulation schemes by which you can change the amplitude of a signal. For example, in the case of laser, if you want to change the amplitude, the most easiest way is you simply change the bias of the laser. So remember, laser is a diode. It's a forward bias diode. So you apply a bias, and depending upon this bias, depending upon the bias what you apply, the output intensity of the laser is going to change. For example, if I want to send an information, if I want to send a pattern of the form 10101, all I have to do is, whenever I have to send 1, I simply turn on the laser. So I apply a voltage, I apply electrical voltage, thereby I turn on the laser. So when the laser is on, it emits a pulse. And if I want to send a 0, all I do is I apply a 0. That means I apply no voltage to the laser. I turn it off. And when the laser is off, no photons are emitted. And therefore, I send a 0. I'm getting a 0. So I turn on and turn off this laser. That means I'm changing the bias. And accordingly, the output intensity of the laser is modulated. So this kind of modulation scheme is what is called as the direct modulation scheme. So it's called as, you call it as direct modulation, where you are directly changing the output intensity of the laser simply by changing the bias. Now, people were very happy with this modulation scheme. The reason is because it's very simple. It's very easy to implement. It's very simple. However, there was an issue with this. When people when the traffic demand increases because of the increase in the internet usage and all the other things, people wanted to send, so always we want to send more amount of data in a given amount of time. That means you want to turn on and turn off the laser at very high speeds. But when you started turning on and turning off the laser at very high speeds, there was an issue. So remember, a laser diode is nothing but a forward bias diode. It's a forward bias PN junction. You have a PN junction, and you apply a forward bias. And when you apply a forward bias, you know that holes from the P side and electrons on the N side are getting injected inside the depletion region, where they recombine and they emit a photon. But when you are trying to turn on and turn off the laser diodes at speeds exceeding 10 gigabits, there was this issue where, so whenever you are turning on the laser diode, you are injecting electrons and holes inside the intrinsic layer, inside the depletion region. So because of this injected carrier density, because of the presence of excess electrons and holes, the refractive index of the cavity, of the laser cavity, slightly changes. So when the refractive index of the laser cavity slightly changes because of the injected electrons and holes, the laser, instead of emitting at a fixed frequency, let's say lambda naught, would now start emitting at a slightly different frequency, which is given by lambda naught plus or minus delta lambda, where this delta lambda is due to the change, is because of this index change. And why did this index change happen? This is because of the excess electrons and holes that were injected when you were turning on and turning off the laser diodes at speeds exceeding 10 gigabits. Now, for speeds below 10 gigabits, the change was so small that it was okay. But beyond 10 gigabits, it so happened that this delta lambda became very large, and as a result, you would note that the laser output frequency or the laser output wavelength slightly changes, and this effect is what is called as frequency chirping. Now, this is a serious drawback in directly modulated laser diodes, which are modulated beyond 10 gigabits per second. And therefore, it turns out that for speeds exceeding 10 gigabits, direct modulation is not a practical scheme. And therefore, we had to go for a scheme which is called as an external modulation scheme. Now, in the external modulation scheme, what you do is you have this laser, and this laser is always kept at a constant bias. The constant bias. The constant bias means you never turn off. So you never turn off this laser. The laser is always kept on. So you have a continuous wave laser. Now external to this laser, you put a new device which is called as a modulator. And what you do is you change the property of this modulator so that you can change the output intensity. So any device that is kept external to the modulator whose property is changed so that either the amplitude, phase, or frequency of the light is changed is what is called as, so this device is what is called as the optical modulator. Now there are now if you look at the conventional optical switch, or if you look at the conventional optical modulator configurations, there are different existing modulator schemes. For example, you can have a directional coupler modulator, or you can have a Mach-Zehnder interferometer modulator. Now, these two kinds of modulators are usually constructed by using a material called as lithium niobate. This is an electro-optic material whose refractive index can be changed by applying an electrical voltage. So these two devices, you know that if I'm launching an optical signal to this, if I'm launching an optical signal to one of the arm of this directional coupler, because these two waveguides are kept in close proximity, you can always have an evanescent coupling between these two waveguides, and after a certain length, which is called as the coupling length, you would see that the light that is launched in one of the arm would be completely coupled to the second arm. And if I apply a voltage to one of the arm, because of the refractive index change due to the electro-optic effect, you would see that the coupling would be destroyed, and as a result, the light would be forced to remain in one of the optical waveguides. So this is how a directional coupler modulator would work. And the Mach-Zehnder interferometer modulator works on the principle of interference. And I hope all of you are aware of how an electro-optic modulator based on having a Mach-Zehnder interferometer modulator can work. So these two modulator configurations, they work on electro-optic effect, or there are also modulator schemes which works on thermo-optic effect. However, one of the common feature of these two devices is that their typical length is in the range of few millimeters. Millimeters means that the typical length is something like 2000 to 3000 micrometers. That's the typical length of these devices. And on the top, these devices are made out of lithium niobate material, which means, unfortunately, they are not compatible for monolithic integration with 3-5 devices. So remember, a laser diode, a laser, or an LED is always made out of 3-5 semiconductors. And just external to this laser, if you have to place, you're going to place a device which is made out of lithium niobate, which usually has a refractive index in the range 2.3, whereas lasers and LEDs being made out of 3-5 semiconductors is going to have a refractive index of the range 3.3. So there is a refractive index mismatch between the laser and that of a modulator. So because of this refractive index mismatch, you will be having a large number of Fresnel back reflections. So you'll have to use all kinds of sophisticated devices like isolators to block all these back reflections, which makes the integration of a modulator and a laser to be complicated if you are using these kind of devices. Now, another choice what we have is what is called as a waveguide type optical modulator of an optical switch, which uses what is called as an electro-absorption effect. Electro-absorption effect means you apply a voltage and the absorption coefficient of the material would change. Now, these devices, fortunately, they are made out of 3-5 semiconductors. So that means the large scale integration of an optical of a laser and a modulator is readily possible. Unfortunately, again, the drawback is they have the device length is still very large. So typically in the range of 600 to 1000 microns. So that's the typical length of these kind of waveguide type devices. So in summary, the conventional optical switches and modulators, unfortunately, they have a long device length, which means they are impractical for large scale integration. So One potential configuration by which we can overcome these drawbacks is what is called as by employing what you call as resonance structures. Now, resonance structures or resonant cavities, the important feature is that they always allow the formation of standing waves at certain frequencies. In other words, they have a very high response only at certain discrete frequencies. Those discrete frequencies are what are called as resonant frequencies. So you call them as resonant frequencies. Resonant frequencies. So these devices support only certain discrete frequencies. For example, Fabry-Perot cavity or a ring resonator configuration, which we will see in detail, and also this distributed Bragg reflector mirror cavity, or even a photonic crystal cavity, all of them belong to the class of resonance structures. However, in today's discussion, we are going to focus about this particular cavity, this particular resonance structure. You call it as the ring resonator cavity. And why do we have to focus on? So we'll see. Now we'll see in detail what do you mean by a ring resonator configuration. So a ring resonator configuration is nothing but, imagine that you have a straight waveguide. And just adjacent to this, straight waveguide, you have a ring waveguide whose radius is r. Now imagine that if you launch a bunch of signals, let's say lambda 1, lambda 2, and lambda 3. So in normal cases, what you would see is whatever you launch here would appear at the output side. But if you have a very special condition, called as the resonant condition, where one of the wavelength is an integer multiple of the radius of the ring, then you would see that this lambda 2 would be tempted to couple to this ring. So this lambda 2 would be tempted to couple to this ring, and it will keep on circulating inside this waveguide, inside this ring waveguide. And if I place a second waveguide adjacent to this, ring, you would see that the resonance signal lambda 2, which was originally circulating inside this ring, would now appear at this point, and therefore I would call this port as the drop port. The reason why I call it as drop port is because this lambda 2 gets dropped here. So since lambda 2 is appearing here at the transmission port, you would see that lambda 2 is missing, and that missing signal, you would see that in the transition spectra, you would see these kind of sharp dips, and whatever is missing here would be appearing at this point. So you call it as a ring resonator configuration, and there are a lot of advantages. For example, they are planar in nature, which means that all the conventional fabrication, the planar fabrication techniques can be used. The planar fabrication techniques are used for forming electronic devices, and in fact some of the optical devices as well. So you can use those conventional fabrication techniques for forming these kind of ring resonator devices. Now they are extremely small. They have a very small footprint, which means that the size is typically few micrometers by few micrometers. For example, their area is as small as 10 microns by 10 microns. And you can construct these kind of materials by using a variety. You can have a variety of material choices, such as glass, silicon, and including 3-5 semiconductor materials. Now, there are different kinds of configurations that can be used for implementing ring resonator devices. For example, in this case, so this device configuration, what you see here, this is an all-pass filter. It's an all-pass filter, whereas this one is a notch filter. It's a notch filter. Notch filter means it will filter only one particular wavelength. All the other wavelengths will be allowed to pass through. Now, in this kind of, so if you look at single ring resonator configuration, you would see that the resonance signal, which is getting coupled to this ring, is sent in the backward direction. But however, if you, instead of using a single ring, if you are going to use a double ring configuration, you would see that the the resonant wavelength lambda 2 would get coupled to the first ring, would get coupled to the second ring, and would ultimately appear as a dropout. So here you would see that the drop signal and all the other signals, they are all flowing in the same direction, which means that they are very good from the viewpoint. So from the interconnect point of view, these kind of configurations are better. And since you are introducing new rings, you are introducing new design parameters, and therefore you are going to have more design freedom. So that's why people are more interested in working with double ring resonators. Now you can always increase the number of rings. For example, these are some of the fabricated results which I have taken from literature. So you would see that if you have a single ring, you would see that. So as I said, these kind of devices can be used as a filter. It can select one particular wavelength and it can reject all the other wavelengths. So if you increase the number of rings, for example, from 1 to 2 or from 2 to 3, you would see that the roll-off rate is going to increase. So you would see that the steepness is also going to increase. By the way, this kind of configuration here, it's not really a ring, rather it's called as the racetrack configuration. It's called as the racetrack. Ring means you have a straight waveguide and then you have a circle. Rather than using a circle, you have a configuration, something called in the form of a racetrack. The advantage is that now if you consider this structure, a straight waveguide and the ring, you will see that the maximum coupling happens only at a certain point. That means if you have a slight variation when you are actually fabricating these kind of devices, if you have a slight let's say deviation, then the output characteristics is going to be completely different. Whereas in this particular case, because you have a racetrack kind of configuration where you have a larger coupling region, you would see that the fabrication tolerance is always going to be better. So these kind of devices are always better from the fabrication perspective, this racetrack configuration. Now we'll see how we can analyze this double ring resonator. How do you mathematically analyze these kind of structure? The reason is because once you can properly analyze this structure, you can actually vary some of the parameters, and then you can have better functionality of this device. Now, if you look at this double ring resonator, you would see that there are 3 couplers. The regions what you see here in the form of this black dotted box is actually a coupling region. So a coupler is the region where you can have some kind of, you will see that when light is launched, when photons come at this point, you would see that some photons would go straight, but you would see that some photons would get coupled here. So the amount of photons which flows, or in other words, the amount of photons that is getting transmitted is being described by this coefficient which is called as the transmission coefficient of the coupler. Whereas the amount of light that is getting coupled to this ring is actually decided by the coupling coefficient of this coupler. So if I launch some photons at this point, you would see that some photons would appear at this point A1, whereas some photons would be directly flowing. Therefore, if I write the electric field amplitude at this point A1, which is denoted by EA1, the electric field amplitude at this point EA1 is given by the coupling coefficient multiplied by the amount of light, that is the amplitude of the light that is coming from this point. That means coupling coefficient into EI plus the amount of light that is getting transmitted from this point D1. Therefore, I can use this logic to arrive at the electric field amplitude at this point A1. So you'll see that when I launch photons, some would go straight, but you would see that some would get coupled here. Now what happens to these photons? These photons would now move inside this ring. It's actually propagating. Now as it propagates from A1 to point B1, what would happen to photons as it's flowing through a waveguide? You would see that there is always a phase change. That phase change is actually decided by the distance that is getting traveled, that is being traveled from distance from A1 to B1. So the amount of phase change is governed by this particular term. And as the photons are flowing through a waveguide, it's not just the phase change that happens. You would see that some of the photons would also be absorbed by the waveguide. That means there will be some loss. Obviously, there is some loss. So that loss is governed by, there is obviously some absorption loss, and that loss is governed by this particular term, where alpha is actually the absorption coefficient or the losses, the absorption coefficient of this waveguide, and n is the refractive index of this waveguide. So now I know what is the electric field amplitude of at point B1. So I can keep doing this exercise for all the various points A1, B1, C1, D1, A2, B2, C2, D2, and so on. So therefore, I'm going to get, let's say, 8 or 9 linear equations. I solve them, and accordingly, you would see that depending upon the electric field amplitude, what I'm launching here, you would see that I can actually find a relationship between ET, ED, and EI. In other words, I can find a relationship between EI, ET, and ED. So this is just the electric field. Now the optical power, but we are not going to measure the electric field. What we are going to measure using a photodetector, what we are going to measure is the power or the intensity. So the power is actually given by the square of the electric field amplitude. So the power at the transmission port, so I would call this as the transmission port. The power at the transmission port and the power at the drop port is given by these two equations. So how do I arrive at these two equations? I write the electric field amplitude at various points and simply solve it. So if you closely examine now, so that means the output power, the power at the transmission port PT and the power at the transmission port PD is given by these two equations, which we have just derived. Now, if you closely look at these equations, you would see that the power at the transmission port and the power at the drop port, apart from the coupling coefficients, these optical powers are a strong function of the refractive index of the ring and also the absorption coefficient of the ring. That means if by some mechanism, if you are able to change the refractive index of the rings or the absorption coefficient of the ring, what you can do is the resonance signal lambda2, which was originally appearing here, can be made to appear at this point. So by changing the index or by changing the absorption of the ring, the resonance signal, which was originally appearing at the drop port, can be made to appear at the transmission port. That means by changing the index of the absorption, I can achieve more functionality to this ring resonator device. And those kind of ring resonator devices, they are called as active ring resonators. Sorry, active ring resonators. So that means you can realize in a micro ring resonator optical switch. Why do I call it as a switch? Because by applying a electric field, the optical signal which was initially present at this point, at this spatial point, at this spatial location, is now being made to appear at a different spatial location. That means by applying an electrical voltage, I have spatially switched the optical signal from one point to the other. And why do I call it as a modulator? Because if I'm just focusing at this point, I have changed the optical intensity of the signal, and therefore I can also call it as an optical modulator. So you can use, and if you can construct these ring resonator devices by using 3-5 semiconductor materials, it's even more advantageous, because in the case of 3-5 based materials, you can easily change the absorption of the ring by electroabsorption effect, or you can also easily change the refractive index of the ring by applying a forward bias and by injecting electrons and holes. So if you look at the spectral response, so here is a finite difference time domain simulation of a double ring resonator structure. So here I have launched a resonance signal. So that resonance signal has coupled to the first ring, coupled to the second ring, and it has arrived at the drop port. So here is the drop port, and here is the transmission port. Here is the transmission port. Now, if I have a non-resonant condition is achieved by changing the refractive index of the ring or by changing the absorption of the ring. So I'm going to change either delta n or I'm going to change delta alpha. So in that case, you would see that the light hardly gets coupled to the ring, and therefore you would see that at the drop port, you would see that you don't have any signal that is appearing here. So whatever signal that is being launched at the input side is all appearing in the transmission port. Now these kind of ring resonator devices, it became very popular. In fact, the popularity exponentially increased in the year 2005 when from a group at the Cornell University and also in collaboration with Intel, they demonstrated the very first silicon modulator based on a ring resonator structure, where they have used a, so here is a SEM image of this modulator, where they have used a laser, where they have used a PN diode, and they applied a forward bias. So because of the forward bias, electrons and holes got injected inside this ring resonators, inside this ring structure, and because of carrier injection, there was a change in the refractive index, and as a result, the light got switched. Instead of getting coupled to the ring, so initially if no voltage is applied, the light gets coupled inside the ring, and as a result at the output you don't get any light. But once you apply a forward bias, because of carrier injection, there was a change in the refractive index, and as a result the light appeared at the output port. So here is the spectral response of the device, what was reported by Cornell. So here they use what is called as carrier injection scheme. Here they used what is called as carrier injection scheme. So you can also use this injection scheme to realize optical modulators in 3-5 based semiconductor devices, but however we'll do that discussion in some of our later talks. But today I'm going to discuss about devices which are optical switches and modulators based on ring resonators that are activated by using electroabsorption. So here is the typical configuration which can be used for realizing electroabsorptive based optical switches and modulators. So here you have a substrate on which you have two parallel waveguides, between you have two ring structures. Now this orange region, what you see here, is the optical waveguide. So all these waveguides, they are in the same plane, and the gap between this straight waveguide and this ring structure is extremely small. Though I have it might appear that the gap is very large, but in fact this gap is typically in the range of few hundreds of nanometers, typically something like 200 to 250 nanometers. Now I am launching the signal, I am launching the resonance signal inside this region, and this region consists of what you call as multiple quantum wells. Now this device usually has a PIN diode configuration. So it has a PIN diode structure, and the intrinsic region consists of quantum wells, and these quantum wells, it act as the waveguide. In fact, it acts as the core of the waveguide. So the quantum wells acts at the core of the waveguide, and this P region and N region, they act as the cladding, and therefore you have optical confinement. And because this straight waveguide and this ring waveguide, they are in close proximity, you can always have evanescent coupling from from the straight waveguide to the ring. So on these rings, so you have a P electrode, and the bottom you have an N electrode. Now if I apply an electric field, what basically happens is the absorption coefficient of the rings suddenly increases because of an effect which is called as the electroabsorption effect. So you have an increase in electroabsorption. Because of electroabsorption, this resonant condition is no more satisfied. That means m lambda will not be equal to 2 pi r into n, and as a result, the resonant signal, instead of appearing at D port, would now appear at the transmission port. And that's how you achieve optical switching in these kind of electro-absorptive ring resonators. Now, quantum wells, if you are not aware of it, they are basically the potential well what you have studied in quantum mechanics, but the physical realization of potential well what you have studied in your quantum mechanics is what is called as a quantum well. A quantum well is constructed by sandwiching a low bandgap semiconductor material between two wider bandgap semiconductor materials. So here is a transmission electron microscope of a quantum well structure. So these black regions, what you see here, they are the quantum well, and so this has so this is made out of a material having a smaller energy gap, whereas these two regions, they have a wider band gap. So the physical implication is that if you have a carrier, if you have an electron or a hole, these electrons and holes are actually confined only, they are confined here. The electron cannot go here, it cannot go here, nor it can go there. The electron can flow only in this direction. So you have what is called as the carrier confinement. So carrier confinement is achieved by employing quantum wells. Now, what is the physical advantage of using quantum wells? Now, if you draw to understand that, you need to go into the details of the band diagram of a quantum well. So, if you have an electron that is confined, you would see that the electronic states are always discretized. The electron energy is always discretized. So the electron, so I would call this as the conduction band, and I would call this as the valence band. So therefore, every electron and hole, electron is going to survive in the conduction band, and therefore electron is going to have a wave function. The hole is in the valence band, and the holes are going to have a wave function. So these are the wave functions of electrons and holes. But because of this confinement, because of the carrier confinement, which is because of this conduction band offset and this valence band offset, so you have what is called as carrier confinement. Carrier confinement. Now, because of this carrier confinement, you would see that there is a Coulomb-like attraction between electrons and holes. They are tightly bound, and therefore there is a Coulomb-like attraction between this electron and the hole. And as a result, electrons and holes, rather than behaving as two different particles, they tend to behave as a single particle, and that single particle is what is called as an exciton. You call it as an exciton, and these excitons are typical nature of a quantum well. You will find these excitons only at room temperature, only in quantum wells, not in bulk semiconductors. In fact, you can see excitons in bulk semiconductors only at extreme low temperatures, something like 5K or 10K. But at room temperatures, you cannot see them because of the fact that the thermal energy is very large. So the excitons, whenever they form in bulk semiconductors, they immediately get dissociated. However, in the case of a quantum well, because of carrier confinement, due to this conduction band offset and valence band offset, you would see that there is a strong Coulomb attraction between electrons and holes, and therefore excitons can easily be seen in the case of quantum wells at room temperature. So the effective band gap of a quantum well structure is not really the bulk band gap. Bulk band gap is actually the energy separation between this level and this level. Rather, the effective band gap is actually the energy difference between this level and this level. That means photons would be absorbed. So if a photon is falling on this quantum well, photons whose energy is exactly equal to the energy separation between this level and this level only will be absorbed. Anything smaller than that will not be absorbed, will be simply transparent through that quantum well material. Now let us see what happens if you have a quantum well under applied electric field. Now under applied electric field, you would see that the energy band diagram of a quantum well structure usually bends. So when you have an applied electric field for a quantum well structure, you would see that there is a band bending. Now, because of this band bending, what happens is the electron energy level slightly comes down and the whole energy level slightly goes up. So there's an electric field which is running from left to right. There's an electric field which is going to this direction. So remember, electric field always runs from positive to negative. It always runs in that direction. And because of that, the electron, which is a negatively charged particle, would be attracted towards the positive terminal, and therefore you would see that there's a wave function distortion. That's why you would see that under applied electric field, the electron wave function is pulled towards the positive terminal of the battery, whereas the whole wave function holds a positively charged particle, and therefore these whole wave functions are actually being pulled towards the negative terminal of the battery. So there is a distortion of the wave function, and most importantly, you would see that the effective band gap has decreased. So there is a decreased. So there's a decrease in the effective band gap. The physical implication of a decrease in effective band gap is that whenever, so if you have a quantum well and if you have an electric field that is applied, you would see that photons whose energy is slightly smaller than the effective band gap would now be absorbed in semiconductor materials where there is an applied electric field. So that effect is what is called as the electro-absorption effect, and since that effect is observed in quantum wells, you call this effect as the quantum confined. You call it as the quantum confined Stark effect, or in short, it's called as QCSE. So QCSE effect is the electro-absorption effect, what you see in quantum well structures. So the end result is that light absorption is always possible for photon energies that is slightly smaller than the energy band gap of the semiconductor material. So we are going to exploit this effect in ring resonator structures for realizing what is called as optical switches or optical modulators. So the concept of electro-absorption is something like this. So if you have a quantum well structure, and let's say that the applied electric field is 0, the absorption spectrum of the quantum well structure at 0 applied electric field would look something like this. But once you apply the electric field, we have seen that the band gap energy of the quantum well structure decreases. So if I'm plotting the absorption spectrum as a function of wavelength, if the band gap energy decreases, you would see that at non-zero applied photon energies, you would see that the absorption spectrum would always move towards longer wavelengths. So there is always a red shift. So there is always a red shift in the absorption spectrum at non-zero applied electric fields. So this is what is called as the quantum confined Stark effect. So it is this modified absorption spectrum which is going to decide the amount of switching in quantum well structures. And in fact, I can always, so let's say that I am launching lambda. So let this be the resonant signal. Let this be the resonant wavelength, what I'm launching at the input port. So let's say that this is lambda. So at 0 electric applied voltage, you would see that at lambda r, at 0 applied voltage, you would see that the absorption coefficient of the ring is extremely small. The absorption coefficient is extremely small. But once I apply a voltage, you would see that the absorption spectrum is now the absorption spectrum that is applicable is actually this dotted line. That means at non-zero wavelength, at non-zero applied voltage, you would see that there's a very large absorption coefficient that is being present. So because of that very large absorption coefficient that is present inside the ring, you would see that lambda r, instead of appearing at this drop port, would now appear at the transmission port. So you can to to understand how the electroabsorption happens in quantum well structures, you would have to, so we would have to solve the Schrodinger's wave equation for a potential well under applied electric field. So it's basically you're solving E psi is equal to H psi. But in the case of a quantum well structure, you're also applying an electric field. So that means the Schrodinger equation is slightly modified. So if you have a equation of the form E psi is equal to H psi, and in the normal case, the solution is simply given by either a sine function or a cosine function or simply a linear combination of them. But however, because of the applied electric field, you would see that the wave functions are now given by Airy functions. The wave functions for an applied electric for a quantum well under applied electric field is given by linear combinations of Airy functions. So you can use these wave functions to actually model what is the absorption spectrum for a quantum well structure. So you can use some mathematical models, and you can always calculate what is the electroabsorption spectrum in a quantum well structure under various applied electric field. Now please remember, since we are interested in using wavelengths close to 1550 nanometer, because that's the wavelength at which optical fibers have the least attenuation, I have used a particular semiconductor material called as indium gallium arsenide phosphide. So this is a quaternary semiconductor material whose material composition as well as the dimension can be adjusted so as to select the appropriate resonant wavelength. So we can model the absorption spectrum, and you would see that the absorption spectrum for a quantum well structure would be different for different material composition. So this is the material composition. This W indicates the width of the potential well. So remember, if you have a narrow potential well or if you have a wider potential well, so in the case of a wider potential well, the electron level would be here, whereas if you have a narrow potential well, the electron level would be somewhere here. And also the applied electric field. So you have this different combinations of the material composition, the width of the potential well, and also the applied electric field, and thereby you can actually model the electroabsorption spectra for a narrow quantum well as well as for a wider quantum well. So in the case of a narrow quantum well, so this is the so I'm just plotting the excitonic absorption spectrum. So this is the absorption coefficient for a quantum well structure whose width is given by 75 angstrom. And once I apply an electric field of 200 kilovolt per centimeter, this absorption spectrum has now become it's this dotted line. This is the modified absorption spectrum. So initially, if I'm using this particular wavelength, let's say 1557.15 nanometer as the signal which I'm going to launch to this device, that signal would appear at the drop port. Now once I apply a voltage, if I apply an electric field of 200 kilovolt per centimeter to this ring, this would be the absorption spectrum for this ring, which means inside this ring the absorption coefficient is something like 1345. That means I'm increasing the absorption coefficient inside this ring, which means this lambda which was appearing at this drop port would now appear at the transmission port. So you can do the same exercise for a wider quantum well. Nevertheless, so we also have to remember that absorption coefficient, whenever you have a change in the absorption coefficient, you would always have a simultaneous change in the refractive index as well, which is always defined by a relationship which is called as the Kramers-Kronig relationship. So change in the absorption is not independent. You always have a change in the refractive index as well. which is always related by the Kramers-Kronig relationship. So we can always calculate what is the change in the refractive index. So you can use all these numerical values, and then you can plug into our transfer functions, and finally you can actually plot what is called as the switching characteristics of a ring resonator switch. So at zero applied electric field, which is denoted by this solid line, you would see that the resonant signal, is missing from the transmission port. That is why you see that at the transmission port you see a big dip, whereas whatever is missing from the transmission port is appearing at the drop port. That's why you see a peak at the drop port. But once you apply an electric field, you would see that the signal at the drop port, there is almost no signal at the drop port. That's why you see the signal value is something like minus 50 dB, whereas at the transmission port you would see that almost all the signal appears there. So in summary, I can say that if you increase the electric field to this ring, you would see that you can increase absorption, and thereby you can make the signal to appear at the transmission port rather than at the drop port. So in fact, recently people have demonstrated these kind of optical switches. In fact, University of Tokyo, Professor Kokuben's group, they have actually demonstrated these kind of ring resonator structures. However, rather than using a simple potential well, they have used what is called as a coupled potential well or a coupled quantum well, where you have this coupling of wave functions between one quantum well and the other quantum well. So the advantage is that you can have a larger change in the absorption coefficient for a smaller applied electric field. So this is a recent result. This is a recent experimental result that has been demonstrated from University of Tokyo. And to conclude, we can say that resonant cavity based devices are excellent candidates for realizing optical switches and modulation. In fact, resonant cavity devices, in particular these ring resonator devices, and also devices based on photonic crystals, they can also be used for demonstrating lasers as well. And by employing quantum wells inside a ring resonator, you can achieve optical switching or modulation. By applying an external voltage, the absorption inside the ring can be varied, and thereby you can make an optical switch to be on or off. And the optical switching that is observed in these kind of devices is a very strong function of absorption in the ring. And in fact, this absorption is a strong function of the quantum well size, the material composition, and also the electric field. That means for a design engineer, you have lots of parameters that can be varied, and you can realize the desired switching performance. And because these switches are based on ring resonator based devices, they have a very small footprint compared to the conventional Mach-Zehnder interferometers or directional coupler switches. And since they have a very small footprint, it's very easy for us to realize optical integrated circuits. And since they are made out of 3-5 based semiconductor materials, you can always integrate them. You can have a direct integration with a laser source or a LED. So these are some of the distinct advantages. In fact, these are some of the unique advantages of ring resonator switches. So with that, I would like to conclude my talk. So thank you all for your patient listening.
Thank you, Suraj.
Yeah, thank you, sir.
Any questions? Wonderful talk from the audience. Dr. Suraj will take up a few questions, one or two, couple of questions.
Yeah, even if you are, let's say that you encounter some question at later stage, you can always email me, or my phone number is available in the Prakash Bharati, our WhatsApp group. So you can always send me a WhatsApp message, or you can even email me. I would be very happy to answer them.
Okay, sure. No questions from the audience? I have a question. Suraj?
Sir, I have a question.
Yeah, sure. Please go on.
Shrikant, sir, you go first. I'll
No,
then.
no, you start. No problem.
Yeah. Hello, sir. It was a
Yeah.
really wonderful session. This is Yashaswini from Malnad College of Engineering under the guidance of Dr. P.C. Shrikant, sir.
Yeah.
Actually, my question is, while designing the ring resonator structure, how to
Yeah.
calculate the gap between the ring and the straight waveguide? I mean,
Okay.
is there any
So,
formula to get the design parameters?
yeah, there is a formula. So, in fact, I don't remember the exact. In fact, you can always use the couple mode theory. But let me just.
Okay.
So, do you have any? Are you specifically working on this problem, or is it only a general question?
No, sir. I'm specifically working on ring resonator structure.
Okay.
Actually, in
fine.
all the papers, the design parameters are readily available, but I don't know
Okay.
how it can be got.
Okay, fine. Okay. So, if you can drop me your email address, I can send you the specific literature which
Yes.
deals with the design of that. Other than that, if there is time, let me just explain you. So, do you have any FTTT package with you?
Yes, sir.
Do you
We
have
are
any?
working in
Okay, fine.
numericals. Yeah.
Okay, good, excellent. Okay, then what you do is you design a straight waveguide.
Okay.
Okay, then you design a ring.
Okay.
And then what you do is let's say you launch some signal here.
Yeah.
You put some signal here, and then
Okay.
in your numerical, you have this provision to adjust this gap, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Definitely,
Okay.
it's there.
So you vary this gap.
Okay.
And then you note
Yeah.
down what is the power you are getting here.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So this is PI. This is PD. And
Yeah.
you draw a graph between, let's say,
Yeah.
gap versus let's say PD by
Power.
PI. You draw
Yeah.
this relationship. Okay, this would be
Okay.
something like if I'm not mistaken, this would be something like you're going to have an exponential decay. I think this the coupling coefficient, which governs the amount of light that is getting coupled from the straight waveguide to this ring, usually
Yeah.
have this particular form. It's of the form exponential minus kappa into some constant.
Okay.
All right. So you can vary this gap, and then you can find out what is the ratio between the drop power and the incident power, and you substitute this back to your transfer function. See, you have this. So if you have a single ring resonator, you can always write an expression like this.
Yes, sir.
Okay, this is PT. Let's say this is PD. So PI should be always equal to PT plus PD. So you can find out what is PT, and you can find what is PD in terms of your ring parameters and the gap.
Okay.
Sorry, the coupling coefficient.
Yeah.
Okay. Now
Yeah.
from this numerical, you find out what is this ratio. You back substitute, then you will find an equation. You solve it, then you will be getting what is this exponential, what is this kappa, and then you fit this graph. You will be getting an exponential curve.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we'll get that exponential curve, but how to identify what is the exact value? The value of the gap. I mean.
Yeah. So that's what. So you back substitute.
Okay.
Then you are going to get a graph like this. Let's say coupling
Yeah.
coefficient
We'll
as a
get
function of
graph.
gap. This also is going to be an exponential function.
Okay.
So given a coupling coefficient, you can easily calculate what is the gap.
Oh, okay. Yes. Got to know that, sir. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Yeah. Any other question?
Hello, sir.
Yeah.
Myself, Adarsham, actually. So I am doing a research on electro-optical network. So same kind of switching can be used in the electro-optical network where we have a flexi grid actually, not a fixed grid.
Can you? I couldn't understand your question. Can you please repeat that?
Yeah, in the electro-optical networks, we use a flexi grid. In the fixed grid, we'll be having a spectral of 50 gigahertz. But in a
Okay.
electro-optical network, what happens? It varies. It is a management of the spectral efficiency. Like
Oh.
for 10 gigabits, we can use one signal, and after that, it can take up to 400 gigabits also. So depending
Okay.
that, like the spectral efficiencies also varies. So in that
Okay.
case, can we use the same kind of a switching, because there may be a problem which occurs over there, right?
So what do you anticipate? I mean, what problem do you anticipate in those kind of networks?
Actually, where the switching speed is to be very high, because in order to send a 500 gigabits or 1 terabits of signal, switching
Okay.
speed should be very high, right? So when we go
So
with the yeah.
see, to my knowledge, let's say that you want to send it. You want to send, let's say you want to send data of, let's say, 1 terabits per second.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think your optical switch is going to work at this speed. What you generally do is we use what is called as this. So you actually you actually combine multiple signals,
Yeah.
or you just combine multiple channels and then you send it. So okay, so ring resonators, I think the maximum speed that has been reported for ring resonators something like I think, if I'm not mistaken, I'm not really sure, but I think it's something of the order of 25 giga. That's what has been reported. I am not sure. I am not gone through the very recent literatures, but I think 25 has been reported, but not above that. In fact, if you are using an if you are using an electro-absorptive based devices, I cannot really comment on the data bit. I cannot really comment on the number of bits that can be transmitted, but for sure the operating speed, the intrinsic speed of this device is something like 10 to 15 picoseconds. That means you need only 10 or 15 picoseconds to either turn on or turn off the switch.
Mm-hmm.
By 10 or 15 picoseconds, what I mean is, this is the time that is required for example, this is the time that is required for, let's say, this wave function to distort. So remember, this is the wave function with no applied electric field. All right. Now, once you apply an electric field, let's say I apply an electric field, let's say I'm applying an electric field of 100 kilovolt per centimeter, the wave function gets distorted like this. So this distortion in the wave function is the one which is going to result in the absorption change. Now, this change is going to happen of the order of 10 to 15 picoseconds. But the actual switching speed would be decided by, let's say, the RC time constant of the circuit, because you have to apply an electric field. For that, you need to have an electrode to which you will have to apply a voltage. So you will be having a microwave source which is going to apply the voltage. So all those RC time constants and all those other parasitics are going to ultimately decide the switching speed of this device. But if you ignore all of them, the speed is going to be extremely high.
Okay.
So does this answer your question, or are you more confused?
No, it's okay. Yeah, because where we use the BBP and all the stuff like that, so I feel like we should move from all the way to all optical switches in order to handle the situation. That's what my thinking. But yeah, I go through once again a survey of the paper so that I can come to a conclusion.
Yeah, okay. Okay. All optical switches is always the best option, but unfortunately, to have a practical all optical switching is extremely difficult.
Okay.
Because if you, let's say that you have a let's say that you have this kind of device. So you have two waveguides, and then you have two rings. So you want to change the absorption coefficient of this ring simply by shining light. So let's say you have a laser beam which is falling on this ring. So this material absorbs the photon. So this is how it happens in the case of an all-optical switch. In this case, so it absorbs the photons. It creates electrons and holes. And these electrons and holes are going to change the refractive index of the ring. Now, what the issue is that, let's say that you have multiple switches which are operating at different wavelengths. All these laser beams will have to be tightly focused on this ring. So will have to be it will have to fall exactly on this ring. Now remember, this is a semiconductor material, and the laser is actually coming from air. So you are going to have some kind of back reflection also from here. So practically, there are a lot of practical implications, but obviously all optical switching is the best. Obviously the best, but practically it's going to have certain disadvantages. Practical disadvantages.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you for the time, sir. Thank you for the answer.
Yeah, welcome.
Suraj?
Yeah.
Suraj? There is a question. This is a question, really good question. That's what I wanted to ask. How, from Professor Vijay Janyani, how the electronics fault in switch is capable of handling terahertz switching speeds?
Sir, I couldn't hear it properly, sir. Can you please?
No.
Can you please repeat that again?
How the electronics part in a hybrid switch is capable of handling terahertz switching speeds?
Oh, how the electronics is going? Oh, okay, that sir, I'm well. That is something which I need to think of, sir. So I'm not. I'm not really into that. So I really don't know, sir. That is in fact, I've thought about. In fact, this has come to my mind, but I really have not paid enough attention to that.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask, the same question. But if it is so, it's a bottleneck, no? Electronic bottleneck.
Yeah, obviously, sir. That is going to be a bottleneck. Obviously, that's going to be a bottleneck.
Okay.
So that is where, so though we say that, well, some of the researchers, they voraciously say that photonics is going to replace electronics. In fact, that is not going to happen. In fact, photonics and electronics will always be existing parallelly. I mean, both of them cannot. I mean, they cannot exist independently. Well, there has to be a marriage between them. So even though we talk about electronics and all these, even though we talk about photonics and all these things, in fact, the electronics is something so we always have to worry about how we feed the signals, what are the RC time constants, what are the parasitics. So all those things are extremely important, sir. Yeah, of course.
Okay, one more question from Ashwini is, sir, how can we adjust the bias voltage of Mach-Zehnder modulator to make it operate in particular operation mode, null, quadrature, null?
What do you mean by null, quadrature, null? Well, if can you, so whoever who has asked that question, can you please ask them to email that question? I'll think about that and then I'll get back, because right now I'm not able to.
Okay, sure. Okay, anyhow, she has asked about the MZI now. Ashwini?
Ashwini, I would suggest you to read. There's a chapter. There's a textbook by Tamir, TAMIR. There's a textbook called as Integrated Optics. So I would recommend you to just have a look on this. Probably this textbook would have explained about how to do that specifically. But please email me that question. I'll also go through it and I'll get back to you.
Yeah. My last question to you.
Yeah.
See, you have shown in the earlier slide that you have for making couplers and another one Maxent MZI modulators and switches,
Yeah.
lithium niobate is used. But as
Yeah,
well
right.
you can as well use third and fifth group element to fabricate those two, no?
Yeah,
Couplers
of course
and
you can. Well, of course you can use, sir. But the drawback is that electro-optic coefficient of gallium arsenide is still pretty bad.
that's okay. Okay, huh? Yeah.
Yeah, that means for practical switching, you would still require a very large length. Maybe not.
Yeah.
Yeah, something like still few thousands of microns. In fact, there are optical switches based on 3-5 semiconductor materials which uses specifically this electro-optic effect, but unfortunately their device size is also pretty large.
Okay. Fine. Okay. So let's just one minute. Sir, Professor Srinivas, sir, any comments from your side?
Nothing particular, but very nice that we had the talk by Suraj. And I hope all the Prakash Bharati people, they will gradually learn to listen to different topics. Even if, you see, I would request all the participants to attend the talks, even if it is not directly your project or your research work, because some of the techniques will be, you always be useful in your work. You can relate to somebody. Sometimes you get a new ideas. So let us thank Dr. Suraj.
Yeah, thank you, sir.
So
Thank you
from
for
my
this
side,
Also, we
opportunity.
would like to know all the people. See, it is also a good opportunity for us to learn all our experts in Prakash Bharati. There are a lot of people are there who are working in different areas. We should listen and learn the various. You see, we can read the paper, but this is very nice to listen to them and interact also sometimes.
okay.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you, sir.
Once
Sir,
again,
very good evening, sir. I also want to take this opportunity to thank Dr. Suraj for giving very informative talk, especially for the students. And thank you for sharing your knowledge. Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Meena ma'am.
so thank you, Dr. Meena.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.